Welcome to this webinar on driving operational efficiency through AI. This morning's session is designed to provide you with the practical insights to inform and streamline your workforce management strategy and increase productivity throughout your business. In a moment, we'll hear from Deputies Harry Wales, who will introduce technology to facilitate smarter scheduling and improve communication. He will also explain how operators can free up managers to focus more on guest experience and team performance. After Harry's presentation, we'll be joined by Mollie's Managing Director, Matt Bell, to widen our discussion into how AI can be adopted more broadly into hospitality operations. So let's get started. Harry, good morning.
Good morning, James. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
Absolute pleasure. So as I said, I'll leave the floor to you, and then I'll come back in with Matt at the conclusion of your presentation.
Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to join today for this webinar. As James already introduced, today's topic is going to be all focused around how hospitality operators can leverage AI to really drive operational efficiency to increase productivity, reduce admin across your workforce, and build all up a more resilient hospitality operation. James has already very kindly done introductions, but obviously we have James as the editor for the Cater, who is your host today, who will be facilitating the conversation after the initial part of this webinar. We've got myself, sales manager at Deputy. I've been a deputy nearly 7 years. And during that time, I worked with both small and large hospitality operators to really understand how workforce management and AI can support in streamlining a lot of those processes and those inefficiencies within the workplace. And then, as James has also introduced, Matt Bell from Mollie's, the managing director there, will be joining to really bring to life a lot of the topics which we're discussing at the front end of this webinar. So what will we be covering today? So for the first half, we're going to be diving into 4 different areas. We're going to start by just setting the scene. So what are the challenges that hospitality workforces are facing today, and what's leading to these inefficiencies that we're seeing? Now, I know many of these you're probably feeling today as operators yourself. We then want to dive into the hidden cost of inefficiencies. So rather than just looking at the first degree cost of inefficiencies, which most people usually associate to, say, labor cost, we want to look at what are the second and third degree hidden costs that are also resulting of inefficient processes within your business. We then want to look at the critical role that AI can have in modern hospitality and how it can help to really streamline and supercharge a lot of these processes, whilst also giving acknowledgement to the role it plays alongside the human element of hospitality. And then lastly, you want to finish off the first part of this session by looking at the 5 pillars of operational efficiency. So the 5 pillars that deputies coin in terms of key things to think about when looking at different opportunities to drive efficiency within your workplace. And then, as mentioned, we'll bring this to life in the second half of the session with a bit more of a broader conversation between James, Matt, and myself. So let's dive on in. Many of the things you're going to see on your screen today are going to be things that you're likely feeling as operators. I probably don't need to tell you that many of these have become more and more challenging over the years. A lot of these acute pains that you're seeing on your screen here haven't happened overnight. The environment in which hospitality operates has really become more acute over the last 5-10 years. We're seeing labor costs increasing across the board with introduction of increases to national insurance. We're seeing recruitment still remaining difficult across the board as well. Margins are becoming more tighter for operators. Guests, at the same time, are expecting fast, consistent, and personalized service, not to mention that their expectations are evolving more quickly than ever, particularly with things like COVID in the last few years and changing consumer demands and behaviors. And then lastly, the compliance environment is becoming more and more complex. The introduction to the Employment Rights Bill into a national living wage means that as operators, we need to be more conscious of how we're applying those complex compliance requirements to our operation. Now, each of these challenges in isolation is difficult by itself. The real problem is that operators have to manage all these things simultaneously. And generally speaking, in most cases, we see that managers are being responsible for doing this using archaic systems, spreadsheets, and applying their own instinct to their operation when thinking about all these different considerations. Now, when I think about this, it takes me back to a time or a conversation I had in April with one of our clients here at Deputy called Whelan's Pubs. Now, Whelan's Pubs owns a number of Irish bars in and around London. Now, as you can imagine, being an Irish pub, their demand fluctuates significantly based on different events, different sporting events, etc. So for them, what they found is that managers were spending enormous amounts of time on managing their teams and rotas to ensure they had the right level of staffing in order to meet the unique demand for that week or that day. What this meant is it detracted significantly from the time that managers could have been spending elsewhere in the business, either with their team members or engaging with customers. So the important point, or the important thing to note here, is that it's not problems caused by managers' lack of effort or not working hard enough, but in many cases, the operation around them simply hasn't kept pace with how demanding that role has become. And that's where operational efficiency becomes apparent. When people typically hear the phrase operational efficiency, they sometimes think about cost cutting or reducing labor. But efficiency isn't simply about taking labor out of the business. It can be about using your people, time, and information more effectively. That can, of course, mean better labor control if you are overspending on labor and not using it correctly. But it should also mean less manager burnout, happier team members, stronger profitability, and an overall better guest experience. Now, all those things that I just mentioned are connected. When a manager ultimately has greater visibility into their operation, they're more likely to have better decision making. When employees receive predictable schedules and clear communication about where they need to be, they're more likely to be more engaged because they know what's going on. When the team is deployed at the right times, guests will naturally receive faster and more attentive service, improving their experience. So as you can see, the goal is not to run every shift with the fewest possible people, but the goal should be to have the right people in the right place at the right time. And to achieve that without creating hours and hours of admin burden for managers to be able to make that a reality. So typically speaking, what I say to operators and clients that we work with, start with the question, where are your managers currently spending time that does not improve the guest experience, does not develop your team, or does not grow revenue? The answer to that question will typically highlight the biggest opportunity for efficiency within your organization. So where are hospitality operators losing money without realizing it? Now, typically speaking, the biggest and most obvious areas where hospitality can see their loss or their costs is on the P&L. It's going to be a cost of goods sold. It's going to be a labor cost. But the harder costs to identify are the small operational inefficiencies that happen every single day. Some examples of that can be manual scheduling. A manager spends 2 or 3 hours building rotas manually and ensuring they have the right number of staff on shift. That's an opportunity cost. Second option might be last minute call outs. Someone calls in sick at the last minute. So a manager then needs to spend a couple hours phoning 7 or 8 different people to find someone to ensure that they're not going to be short staffed for a shift. An employee might work overtime and that may not have been recorded until it comes out on payroll. So therefore your labor numbers are inflated over and above what you originally forecasted. A payroll correction might be required. So the employee, the manager, maybe even the payroll team all need to become involved to reconcile that and ensure that what's being recorded is accurate so that staff member gets paid correctly, but also so that your labor costs are accurate. A shift change may have occurred in a silo on WhatsApp. Maybe an employee is messaging the manager and that shift change has occurred, but it wasn't reflected on the rota. So there's misalignment between who's meant to be working and who's actually working. Now, these are just some examples of hidden costs. And as you can tell, if we look at each of them in a vacuum, then they're relatively small. But across multiple managers, in multiple locations, across multiple weeks, these inefficiencies become extremely expensive. There's also the opportunity cost associated with that, as I previously mentioned. Every hour that a manager is chasing availability, correcting a timesheet, or searching through messages is an hour that they're not coaching someone, not speaking to a guest, or not improving the operation. It always amazes me just how hidden these costs can be and how at a headline level, there's no visibility on the implication of them. Typically what it involves is having to zoom in and break down the process piece by piece to really begin to identify what the true cost of this is. It was only a few weeks ago that we were working with a hotel group here in the UK, where their FD had identified that they had a number of inefficiencies within their payroll and scheduling processes that were impacting their ability to scale. Now, the FD took it to their owner to look at and investing into deputy to help to streamline these processes. Initially, the owner was a little bit hesitant because he struggled to understand how the relationship between time saved on scheduling or time saved on reconciling payroll could actually drive value and ROI for the business. So what we did was we worked with this FD to take away the process, break it down bit by bit, actually quantify what the amount of time that was being spent on these processes, and then take it back to the owner. What we were able to do is actually identify that based on the cumulative time spent on these inefficient processes and across these fragmented systems, the business was leaking about 50K annually through these processes. By being able to really break it down bit by bit, multiply it across the organization, we can begin to articulate what the true cost is of inefficiency to the business from both a P&L perspective, but also from a customer and employee experience perspective. So operational efficiency is often achieving just these small tweaks and improving these repeated moments. It's not necessarily about some great big transformational project. So what role does AI have within this and within hospitality more broadly? And I'm sure AI is something that's on top of everyone's mind, either within hospitality or outside hospitality. We're hearing about it everywhere in relation to the impact that it's having on our society and on our work. Now, there are two typically different stories that we're hearing in relation to AI. One is that AI is going to replace everyone and every role. That's the more dramatic one. The other is that AI will solve every operational problem automatically. Now, I don't think either of those two stories is particularly useful when applied to the context of hospitality. Because in hospitality, really what I believe is the most valuable role for AI is much more practical. It's about removing those repetitive work so that managers can spend more time leading people and be involved in the operation and with customers. What AI is really, really good at is digesting massive amounts of information and identifying patterns within that information. It can process information, it can identify those patterns, and it can complete those repeated tasks at speed, far beyond what a human can do. On the flip side of that is a manager. Now, a manager can actually complement AI in a way that AI can't, which is by bringing context of what's going on, applying judgment to the decisions that AI has provided, and also adding empathy and understanding of the team. AI doesn't exactly know that, say, one of your team members is having a bad week, maybe they've broken up with a long-term partner, and that they're going to need more support for that week. It doesn't understand the mood of the restaurant, say 5 to 10 minutes before service, and it cannot recreate general hospitality in the way that a human being can. And that's typically why I love to use the analogy of AI being a very capable sous chef. What it can do is it can prepare the ingredients, it can organize all the information, and it can make a recommendation. But ultimately, the manager still needs to taste the sauce before it goes out. AI is very good at being able to provide that analysis, being able to look at the data and provide a recommendation. But us as people and us as managers within the hospitality space need to provide the judgment on top of that. When used well, it doesn't remove the manager from the operation, but it gives the manager more capacity to manage and actually be involved in the parts of the operation that people got in hospitality to work for. So, as I mentioned at the start, we've come up with this concept of 5 pillars of operational efficiency here at Deputy. The first of those pillars is smarter scheduling. So this is where we're actually using demand triggers to determine what are the habits and what is the labor need that we have at a site to ensure we have the right number of staff on shift. The second is better communication, looking at reducing the confusion created when operational information is spread across several systems and conversations. The third is workforce productivity. That involves helping people spend more time doing valuable work and creating an environment in which experienced employees want to stay because they feel empowered to do their best work. The fourth is compliance. So that's where we're looking to build rules and checks into daily processes rather than having the onus being put on managers to remember all the different considerations when it comes to compliance, requirements. And the fifth piece is continuous improvement. So this is where we're using data and workforce data in particular to learn what is working and what might need to be changed or amended to ensure that we're keeping the ship on course. Now, these pillars really shouldn't be looked at in isolation because they actually all reinforce one another. If you have better rotas, then it's going to improve your communication because staff know where they need to be. If you have better communication, then you're going to improve engagement because people know what they need to do and when they need to do it. When you have a more engaged and experienced team member, then you're naturally going to have a more productive workforce. Better data also then comes back around and helps to feed and provide insight into that next rota. So as you can see, a flywheel effect begins to occur as we look at all these different pillars working in tandem. So the goal here really is to create a positive operational loop. So let's go ahead and jump on into each individual pillar here. So diving into smarter scheduling. Now, this is an area at Deputy that we support a lot of our customer base. We support a lot of them when it comes to workforce transformation in relation to scheduling. Typically, what we see is the most common process for scheduling in hospitality at the moment is that people will look at past rotas, past weeks, to inform what the current week should look like. Now, that approach is understandable because managers are short on time. They don't have hours on hours to look at data and begin to forecast and understand what exactly the true demand might be for this week. But as we all know, last week or last Friday, for instance, isn't the best prediction of what will happen this Friday. And there's no better time or example than right now, obviously with the World Cup. If you're a pub, then the last 6 weeks of trade have probably been an absolute roar, but that's now finished. So this week can't be an indication, last week, sorry, can't be an indication of what this week's going to be like for a pub. that relied heavily on the World Cup. So naturally, demand changes because of things like weather, bookings, events, as I just mentioned, promotions, seasonality, and hundreds of other small little patterns. So the thing we need to ask ourselves when we think about efficient rotors is the simple question of what work will actually need to be done, and when within the day or the week will it need to be done. So that means understanding all the different historical peaks and troughs and seasonality and overlaying that with other third-party factors. Now that's where AI can really support. As we mentioned previously, AI is amazing at being able to process massive amounts of data far beyond what the human mind can do. So you can take in all your different time series data, such as historical sales, transactions, bookings, whatever that key metric is for you. And it can overlay that with third-party data, such as events, promotions, weather, to understand and predict a forecast for the future. But the forecast alone is not the final answer. You need to be able to translate that data or that forecast data into a labor plan. So you need to ask your questions around what roles do you need to fulfill that demand? What are the skill requirements or skill matrix that you need of your staff in order to provide the best customer service for that demand? And what's the service standard that you're trying to achieve here? Are you focusing on customer experience and therefore indexing on having more staff? Or are you more focused on labor control, in which case we want to be looking at what's the minimum amount of staff we might need in order to meet that demand? Are there any opening or closing procedures to be account for to ensure that we're prepared come open as well? This is where human judgment is critical. The manager is able to apply that judgment based on the forecast that's being produced. And it's these two things working in tandem that lead to more efficient and smarter scheduling. Now, for the keen-eyed on the call, you might notice that there's a familiar name on the screen. So in a past role, Matt, who's now at Mollie's, was the previous hotel operations director at Citizen M. And during that role, Matt was responsible for bringing deputy into the business. Now, I don't want to share too much on this topic because I'm sure Matt will have more to share when we get to our discussion. But I want to highlight this quote from him because I think it really reinforces that positive operational loop that we just previously discussed. Employees are happier when we have the right people on the right shift at the right time. We get better productivity and guest satisfaction, all while saving time and money. So as you can see, operational efficiency isn't just about time and money within the organization. It's also about driving productivity and driving employee satisfaction and ultimately a better guest experience. So what we can see here is a good forecast helps you avoid both sides of the problem. As we all know, overstaffing, it eats into margins. Understaffing can also damage revenue because you don't have enough staff there to capture the true capacity of that demand. It can also overwhelm teams because staff don't feel supported, they don't have enough support from other team members. And it can also create a poor guest experience because it will likely lead to longer wait times and less attentive service. Smart scheduling is therefore not about just minimizing labor. It's about aligning that labor with the demand that you need to provide the best quality outcome and service. Pillar 2 is all about communication. So if I was to ask you how many different places an employee might currently go to find out information about their work life, how many would there be? Typically speaking, when we hear or speak with hospitality operators, there are multiple different channels, both official and informal, that employees might use to find information. So typically most hospitality teams don't have a communication problem because people aren't communicating. Typically it's the result of there being too much communication in too many different channels or it happening in all these different places. There might be a WhatsApp group for a specific site. There might be a WhatsApp group, say, just for managers. There might be private messages between a manager and employee. You might have more formal emails coming from head office down to your employees, or you might have even things physically stored on site like a rota. So the information obviously exists in these places, but it's these silos that lead to things like missed updates, shift confusion, and unnecessary changes. In addition to that, it can also create an unhealthy expectation for both managers and employees to always be available if these work conversations are occurring within personal channels. What we see is if we can bring everything into one place, so scheduling and workforce communication, then it begins to set much clearer boundaries as well as create more efficiency for both managers and employees. Employees will be able to see their shifts, they'll be able to offer or swap shifts through an agreed business process, as well as receive relevant updates about their operation in real time in one place. Managers will also see benefits because they can see everything in relation to requests, approvals, all within one place, and they won't have to reconstruct it looking at different channels, different WhatsApp groups, or different conversations that they've had in the past. So efficiency doesn't mean necessarily communicating more, but what it means is communicating more clearly through fewer channels with a reliable record so that everyone knows what's happening. Pillar three is all around productivity. And I think this sits squarely within the five pillars because it is a byproduct of everything upstream of it. If we can get scheduling correct, then people are going to know where they need to be and they'll be as productive as possible because they know what they're going to need to do. If we're communicating with staff, then they're up to date with what's going on. And so then they know and feel empowered to do their best work. Typically speaking, what we see though is when people talk about labor productivity, it's very tempting to reduce people down to just a number. Sales per labor hour, covers per employee, hours used against a budget, whatever it might be. Now, of course, those metrics are important. They're a good estimate of health within the business, and then you need a way to benchmark that. But they don't tell the whole story when it comes to productivity of your workforce. As we all know, if you have an experienced and engaged employee, they're often going to be able to achieve much more within a shift than someone that's either just joined and needs to be trained, who's unclear on their responsibilities because of poor communication, or is already thinking about leaving. Productivity is heavily influenced by an employee's experience and by their engagement with your workplace. Predictable schedules allow employees to plan their lives so they can accommodate those things that are important to them beyond work and feel more happy about that. Clear communications will also reduce frustration because people will know where they need to be, what they need to be doing, and have a very clear mission for their day. Better training is going to help employees become more confident, more capable in the role because they're going to have the right skill sets to do their best work. And as we know, when good employees stay, that means the organization retains that knowledge and spends less time constantly recruiting and retraining. Now, there is also a direct operational effect here. When employees can update, say, availability easily and participate in shift swapping through a controlled process, managers are more likely to fill shifts quickly and less likely to spend time chasing people, therefore bring more productivity into the workforce. AI can also help this and can provide an additional benefit because it can help make better recommendations. By being able to prompt and recommend to managers where things require their attention and how to drive more productivity within the workforce, AI can support in ensuring that automating those routine tasks that managers have traditionally done. So as we know, sustainable productivity depends on also creating an environment where people feel like they can contribute their best work. So the fourth pillar is all about compliance. Now, this is something that if you've been in the industry for a little while, you've probably seen an increase of this over the last few years as the compliance environments become more and more complex. But it is also another area where managers are disproportionately expected to carry an enormous amount of information in their heads and apply that to the way they operate, whether that be through creating schedules or through looking at an individual's own circumstances. These needs to consider can be things like hours worked, rest periods between shifts, that the right breaks are being applied, that overtime is being captured correctly, whether an employee's age applies to it. As you can see, the list goes on and on. Even an experienced manager who may have been in the organization or been in the industry for years can potentially make mistakes because human error naturally pops in. So the best approach we find is that every manager should not be expected to become a compliance expert, but these compliance checks should be built into the process that you have in place already. So that could mean automatically tracking hours and breaks, flagging potential overtime before it's been scheduled, keeping a record of scheduled changes to ensuring that you have a reliable audit trail when needed. This does two things to the business. Firstly, it's going to reduce business risk. Compliance breaches have a potentially detrimental impact on businesses in the form of fine or reputational damage. So by building these processes in and not relying on the human oversight of it, you're safeguarding the organization to ensure that you have the right checks and balances in place to limit your exposure to a potential breach. Secondly, from the human side, it's going to give managers more confidence. They're going to be able to make decisions more quickly and more effectively, knowing that they have a system that can support them and will flag up any attention that might be required. AI obviously also plays a role here because it can more proactively identify exceptions and flag those to managers rather than managers having to inspect every single shift or every timesheet and every employee manually. So the principle should be pretty simple here. Managers should spend time focusing on the true exceptions that they need to when it comes to compliance, not necessarily having to go and search or understand whether or not they exist in the first place. So the final and fifth pillar is all around continuous improvement. And this is key because as we know in hospitality, things change regularly. Nothing remains the same. The key thing here is you cannot improve what you don't measure or you can't see. But at the same time, we don't want to overwhelm and create loads of dashboards and loads of KPIs for people to see because that just creates noise and doesn't make it clear in terms of what we're looking to achieve. So the most useful starting point here is often to just identify what are the small subset of measures that we want us to look at so that we can understand the business outcome that we're aiming to achieve. So this might include things like labor costs, attendance, overtime, staff turnover, or sales per labor hour. The important part is not simply tracking the numbers. It's about using those numbers to then infer or ask a question about what we should do next. So for instance, if you're tracking labor cost, you might ask yourself, why does one shift or one site consistently exceed its labor target? What is the impact or what is the downstream reason for that? What's the root cause? The issue, is it a rota issue? Is it the demand forecast is incorrect? Is it the employee's skills are wrong to match the roles that need to be fulfilled? Or is it an operational process that's leading to that error? Another question might be, why does one site have more last minute absence than another? Or why is one manager repeatedly editing the rota after publication? The data shows you where to look, but it is that human judgment that we've discussed already that applies the understanding on what needs to be tweaked and when we should tweak it. All up, continuous improvement is key because everything downstream from this relies on someone being able to have that oversight, being able to apply that judgment, and then being able to tweak accordingly to ensure that the ship is always on course and that you're achieving the key goals you're wanting to achieve. So before we move on to the broader discussion with Matt and James, I just want to leave you 5 key takeaways or 5 reminders from here. The first is start with removing manual work. If you want to drive efficiency within your organization, identify and ask that question around where are managers spending time that doesn't drive better guest experience, better revenue outcomes, or a better employee experience. By identifying those manual tasks, you can look to automate and create simpler life both for your managers and your employees. Secondly, look to improve communication by creating one trusted source of information. By having fragmented communications, naturally there's going to be issues with people being misaligned or not being updated on what's going on. Third, empower your teams. Productivity is not something that you should be looking to just extract from your employees, but it's something that you should be enabling through greater tools, greater training, clearer expectation setting and communication, and an overall better experience. Fourth is automate compliance wherever possible. This is something which a lot of tools out there can help with today. Don't make risk management dependent on someone, on a human being, to remember every single rule, but rather building those processes, building those flags to ensure that you're safeguarded and that the onus isn't on the manager and that responsibility. And then finally, as I touched on, measure continuously. Everything downstream from this requires an understanding on what the key KPI is, having visibility on that, and then being able to adjust accordingly. Efficiency isn't just one project that you complete and then move on from, but it's something that you need to be continuously tracking, and it requires hundreds of small improvements over time. Of course, AI has a massive role to play in terms of supporting all of this to help improve the ability to identify opportunities, implement, and then repeat at scale quickly. So thank you for listening. I appreciate that covers a lot of the kind of theory around operational efficiency. If you found it useful and you want to dive a bit more into the tactical elements of this, then I'd recommend you taking out a phone or a camera to scan the QR code on the screen today. That will take you to our ebook and checklist. So this ultimate guide of operational efficiency for shift-based businesses. So a lot of the material that's been covered today is a byproduct of that report, but it will give you more tactical tips and tricks on how to actually apply this and test this within your organization today. But for now, let's jump over to Matt and James to have a bit more of a broader discussion around how to actually apply this within your organization in real time.
Thanks very much, Harry. That was fascinating. We have had one question in for you, and actually, just before I introduce Matt, I want to ask something as well. And this person's asked, how can compliance be automated? And I think that's sort of that's part of what I was thinking as well. Is that, if someone's used to engaging through WhatsApp or whatever with your boss and just going, oh, can I swap Thursday? And how do you ensure people actually go do it the right way so you don't have that audit trail?
It's a really good question. So it all comes around, I think, firstly, governance of technology. So ensuring that you have the tools in place to support that, and then understanding what are the processes or what is the compliance aim. So in the case that you just described there, James, if it is about having oversight on shift swapping to ensure you have like the right qualified employee that would be swapping shifts, there are a lot of tools out there, Deputy being one, but there are a number of tools on the market that can support in building those business rules into the platform and then providing a mechanism for which an employee can request a shift. And then it will also, in the process of doing that, check and make sure that that shift is compliant with things like working time directives to ensure someone's not going to be overstaffed if they swap that shift, ensure someone's qualified for that role. So those rules can be defined in the back end by the business, but also apply the kind of standard regulatory applications of what needs to be worked as well.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Matt, thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Before we go on, would you like to give us a bit of an overview of Mollie's for anyone not familiar with the business?
Yeah, of course. So Mollie's is a UK-based motel and diner brand. We opened our first property in Oxford in 2019. And the principle was creating a more desirable, affordable hotel and diner proposition. And whilst we look at what you see typically in the budget sector and the big players within that component, and they do a brilliant job, our feeling is today's consumer wanted and wants a little bit more. They want a little bit more from a design perspective. They want a little bit more from the F&B component. And Mollie's is really designed for that consumer whose taste is a little bit more geared to premium design, to quality of food. And we have sites now in Oxford, in Bristol. We recently opened our first city centre in Manchester. We've acquired a piece of land up in Edinburgh. So we're in a growth mode at the moment, looking to acquire 2 to 3 more sites in the next 18 months or so to roll out this proposition in the UK.
Fantastic. And tech is a big part of the business, obviously. I mean, it's a relatively new business, isn't it? And in a sense, you've been able to, it's been grown with tech as an integral part of it, rather than sort of bolt on, as we're talking about, to some hospitality business. But what's in the wider industry? What do you think is driving this shift towards AI use? What's encouraging you to really implement new technology?
Yeah, so if we want to deliver these sort of boutique lifestyle propositions at motel prices, we have to work out how those small marginal incremental increases in revenue we can flow through. It's if you charge more money, have a better product often comes at higher price. So you don't actually see that flow through and create any competitive advantage. So ultimately, we're looking consistently. And this was the Citizen M play as well, which is how do we optimize that flow through? And it happens through a series of elements, whether that be the relationship between the size of the room and the public areas, whether that be the centralized operating model that you deploy, so you take out cost of each individual property where there may be slight inefficiencies and centralize those components. So it happens across the board, the owner-operator model that we have. But a fundamental component of this is technology. And technology ultimately will help you effect a transformation within your business. And I mentioned that retail-orientated approach, that ultimately, if you are really to create standardization and efficiency and step and repeat, so you really have that the efficiencies of standardization, and you can roll that out. You need technology that enables you to create that standardization and centrally give that insight to push it back into optimized performance. So technology is a fundamental pillar that will affect that transformation and optimize that flow through. And the emergence of it, I mean, look, technology's been, well, of course, technology in some shape or form has been around forever. But what we're seeing is the whole AI piece, which has exploded and is in front of everybody at the moment. I think it's important to realize that's also not necessarily a new thing. AI in itself has been around for some time, and it started in this rules-based system. Previously, it followed a series of instructions. And then, and as Harry sort of spoke about, you get into this rules, into the big data and machine learning, what's happening. And that sat often embedded within individual applications you had within your business. And now what I think has really become into the public's conscience and very visible became the more generative AI component and conversational AI. And how that really works, and now the use of the LLMs, the proliferation of a Claude or ChatGPT, really it's much more visible and available to people, and that drives people's belief and understanding of what is potentially possible now. And now you layer on this idea of agentic AI, where systems are genuinely taking actions. They are thinking increasingly for themselves within that space and completing tasks on their own. Is this sort of exponential shift now in the impact it can have on businesses?
And I think the agentic piece is where people start to get their minds blown a little bit and think, right, this technology, how do I influence with technology that's thinking on its own, and I can manage that technology? I mean, are you employing any agentic solutions as such?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have agents running across our platform, carrying out different tasks, and mostly in the back office space at the moment, and increasingly some stuff that is in customer focused in responding to in that sort of customer conversational component, from a telephone call perspective, from online inquiries. But a lot of the stuff that we're doing actually is taking away the drudgery of the back office component, the complexities that come within hotels around specific requirements of individual TMAs, through GDS and requirements that are happening and flowing in on that basis. And rather having an individual that's sorting through that, we have agents that are picking up on that and managing those processes for us.
And how's that worked in practice? I mean, is your team having to come in and change it and smooth anything out ever, or is it just works? It all works perfectly.
Yeah, so it didn't work perfectly from day one. So there's testing and understanding that happens
Yeah.
before you deploy, and I think that's a really important component. You cannot simply deploy technology into an operation and expect it to be adopted, and particularly if it doesn't actually add meaningful value. And if you don't have a sense of ownership for what you're deploying, then who is making sure that what you want it to do is actually doing it right? So there is, on the one hand, this tremendous opportunity that people see as the deployment of technology and the likes of AI, but you cannot do that without recognizing there are additional costs that come with it, which is overall the governance of the architecture that you're putting in place, the auditing and management of the performance of that. And really, you see people's current understanding of how we manage employees. There is also increasingly a responsibility for the management of agents. There will be, this agentic AR HR function, which is my agent performing to the level that I want it to be, and the parallels are not difficult to draw between what happens with humans and what's happening with agents to that end. They're probably just maybe better at taking feedback.
Interesting. I've not thought of the HR angle of sort of a development plan for agentic AI, but I guess that's
And that's what it is. That's what we're doing. We're telling, and this is how well you're performing at the moment. And if you do this, this, and this, it will be even better. And on that basis, it goes, oh, okay, no problem. Let me do that for you. But the monitoring of the output of that becomes relevant as well. So the parallels are really similar to it. It's just a bit of a shift in thinking of how it works in practice.
Indeed, and Harry, that leads me, that brings you nicely in there. That shift in thinking. I mean, how open? Obviously, this is a great enhancement to your tech, but how open to discussions are operators about bringing in AI solutions like this, and what sort of? I'm sure you get some regular feedback from managers who are like, no, I know that Jerry always works a Wednesday, and it's I know better than any tech solution could.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think over time, we've seen a real shift in terms of awareness. And I think Matt hit the nail on the head there that I think this public awareness of the consumer grade AI has led to more people asking about it in conversations and wanting to understand the application of agentic AI and more broadly AI in everything from labor optimization through to automating certain processes within the business. So we've seen this real, I guess, curiosity over the last 2 years, which maybe wasn't there before, whereas prior to that, it was more problem led. I had X problem. How can I improve that? Here's how maybe you can use AI to help, streamline that process or save time. So we've definitely seen a shift in, I guess, curiosity of what AI can do within the hospitality setting across all different functions. I think the big, I guess, resistance or the interesting thing we've seen in a lot of conversations is that kind of, I guess, like you just alluded to, James, the tension between management and head office and the employee aspect of or the frontline manager and taking them on that journey to understand how it can help, but also what input they have in as a human. And that's what I was kind of touching on in the session that I just ran, is that the way that we think about AI in terms of application within the workforce, which is where specifically Deputy plays, is that AI can take in all that information at scale, provide a recommendation, but that manager still has the judgment to apply to that. So in our agentic AI solution within Deputy, AI can provide recommendation, provide proactive prompts around certain things to go and do based on the data that it can see within the system, but it will always have human in the loop. the human will have that oversight on whether or not it is positive, negative, or whether to apply it and go ahead and take that action. And to Matt's point, it's about learning from that. So every action that, or every bit of feedback that a manager provides or someone from head office provides to the agent over time, it will improve. So the next recommendation will be refined to be more in line with the way that business behaves. So we've seen definitely a lot more interest in using it. But there is still a bit of, I guess, taking people on the journey to understand the value add for all the different stakeholders within the business. Because what we see is the number one reason AI projects fail is because of lack of adoption or lack of engagement from team members. So being able to take people on that journey is critical to then get the actual business outcomes, which is the majority of the reason people engage and look at AI as a potential solution.
Yeah, indeed. Where do you see Matt in this level of adoption? I guess Matt's pretty further ahead than most people.
Well, it's interesting you say that because obviously Matt when he was at Citizen M, he was at the forefront of looking at how they could operationalize and improve the way they schedule by using big data. So he was kind of well ahead of the curve before that consumer grade AI came out in conversation. And then hearing obviously what he's doing now at Mollie's, I'd say he's definitely at the frontier when it comes to using agents and improving them in those processes. So definitely a lot to be learned from what he's doing over at Mollie's and how to use it in, I guess, a responsible and effective way.
And Matt, a big part of what Harry has just said is about engagement. How do you bring the team along in that as well? Obviously, you're deep in it. You understand what benefits productivity-wise and elsewhere in the business it can bring. But how are you bringing your teams in and making sure they are really engaging with it and really using the tools available?
So I think a lot of this is ultimately driven by understanding purpose and having team members that themselves are committed to the broader purpose of what you're doing within your business. And if those individuals are not engaged in the broader element of your business, then everything that you're going to do becomes a little bit harder. And of course, people that say they are and people that deeply are is something it can also be a bit different. But ultimately, it comes back down to the culture that exists within your organization and the trust that is built between the team and the broader company, the management. And that separation feels a bit uncomfortable sometimes because it's a collective in terms of what's happening within that space. And ultimately, if you, and this is a philosophy that we espoused and operated within Citizen M, is you invert that pyramid. If you realize that the most important person in your business is genuinely the customer and you want them to come back, and the person that is speaking to the customer is your frontline team member, then you realize that that's the person that's ultimately having the biggest impact on customer experience. It's not the MD or the CEO ultimately. And so within that, in that hierarchy, therefore, it is the role of each layer within your organization to support the person above them to be the best at delivering what is expected of them and creating clarity around that. So if you listen to what your team's challenges are and where the issues sit, and Harry talked about that, first identify what the frictions are within your organization, see how you take that away. Who is not going to appreciate the fact that you've listened to what their problems are and you are helping deliver solutions that stop them from doing that? The problem might be that, and if I get a real case situation, if you have someone working at your front desk that loves process, that they love receiving the data and doing stuff on a computer, my question would be, is that person really the best front desk person for what you've got? Because what fundamentally do we want the person at the front desk to be doing? We want them to welcome the customer in. We want them to be connecting with that person as they arrive and creating genuine warmth and hospitality. They can't do that by typing numbers into a computer. And so it's really understanding who your team member is, what the role is that you want them to play, and putting them in a position where they are in flow, doing what they genuinely want. So the resistance will come if you're asking people to do something that they're not intrinsically comfortable with in the first place. So deep understanding of people, what their intrinsic motivation is, and making sure, and you saw sort of the quote, that you've got the right people on the right shift kind of stuff doing it, the right people in the right role, is so fundamental. And then solving their problems and using technology to do that is the route forward.
Yeah, I think go on, Harry.
I was going to add on to that because I think Matt's hit the nail on the head there. I think just to add on from a more kind of tactical perspective of what we see that works well with taking employees and taking team members on that journey is, of course, identifying the problem, finding where that pain is acute within the organization, who's impacted by it, and building a champion around them. So being able to use them to tell the story of the benefits of that AI application that you're utilizing, so that the story is coming from the bottom down. It's not necessarily top down. You can get a champion, you can disseminate the benefit of that process improvement to other people in the organization. Then you begin to get an adoption. You begin to get a bit of groundswell around the benefits of the AI, of the process that's being improved.
And Harry, are there any sectors that are doing it absolutely brilliantly, where hospitality can look and say, "Wow, that that's someone to follow"? There in your experience? Um,
Uh, It's a good question. I think one that always pops to mind that I guess you wouldn't typically maybe label as the most advanced in terms of technology, but I think the commonalities or similarities that I've seen from engagements is in healthcare, particularly because there is that same relationship between human and technology in the sense of within healthcare, it has the same potential benefits in terms of improving a lot of those back office processes, it reducing the amount of time that a manager or a frontline worker has to spend on filling in paper sheets or filling in paper documentation, but actually being able to spend time caring with individuals, spending time caring and supporting a patient, or spending time if you're in a care home supporting an elderly person with dementia, for instance. So I think I've seen a lot of really positive applications there of just getting that balance right of understanding and really articulating that the opportunity here within the sector isn't about what we're generally hearing in the news today, which is AI can be completely disruptive and eliminate lots of roles. It's actually about removing parts of the roles that aren't actually the core foundational pieces of why people are doing that in the first place. And so I've seen a lot of really good applications of that because, I mean, here at Deputy, we support organizations beyond hospitality, healthcare being one of the core sectors we work with. I think it's that narrative that helps to bring people on the journey to understand here's the benefit, here's the application, here's the savings. I can actually spend more time improving people's lives in the case of healthcare, or in this case, improving a guest experience in hospitality.
That's great. And Matt, is AI changing the way you look at your kind of tech stack? I mean, obviously, in the past, people used to get the sort of whole solution models, but now perhaps you can plug in as long as you've got open AI, then you can unpick it quite more simply with an AI solution, with AI's help. Is that correct? Or
Well, look, I think there's definitely two camps in terms of the approach of what you go with in that, and vendors will definitely tell you a different approach in terms of what's in there. So there are the monolithic vendors that are in play that will say you're better to work with us because the integrations already work in terms of what it is. So you don't have to worry about an API because we're a fully integrated application that provides that information to you. And I think there's anybody that's ever had to deliver some form of integration between two platforms, even if it is fully open API, will still tell you that there are challenges that exist within it, and vendors that are looking to each other going, no, it's not me, it's them. So I think that there are definitely two schools of thought around it. Mollie's, and again, in my time in Citizen M, was definitely built in the kit of parts approach. We've sought to build that by looking at best in class platforms, and trying to create an architecture that means that because technology is moving so fast, that as a new solution comes along, if it is meaningfully better and adds value into our organization that the legacy system doesn't, or if there is a new challenge that needs to be addressed, I can bolt in the new application that meets it. We believe that flexibility is advantageous rather than being dependent on the roadmap of any single vendor within that space. So for us, there is a philosophy and building on that. But as I said before, and by the way, sometimes that looks relatively cheap as well when you look at these smaller dedicated platforms in place. But what you have to do is wrap around resource around that has a clarity and vision and architecture and clear control processes, because you have to own that the entirety of that tech stack, because it doesn't now live with any one vendor. But for us, it's definitely the route that we're taking, because we think it gives us greater agility to navigate the complexities and an increasingly volatile world.
totally, I guess horses for courses, isn't it? Let me come to a couple of questions. Harry, a specific one from Julie about sort of lead times on scheduling. She's saying in events, things get congested, bookings come in late. How do you manage that within the sort of deputy system when it's relying on? Well, I guess what she's saying is only a human can say, "Oh goodness, I know next Wednesday actually there's this issue." How does that work in deputy system?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think this is a good caveat for AI because Obviously, I think some people think of AI as being a kind of magic wand. But at the end of the day, AI, one of the biggest dependencies on AI is data. So the data you bring in to inform what this case, the forecast is highly dependent on the accuracy of that data. So the way that works within our world is that we look at what are the different data sources that are dependent on demand for an operator. So if we take a hospitality setting, it might be sales transactions. What is the forecasted sales transaction covers, or in your case, it might be bookings. So if that's stored in, say, a CRM or some kind of location, the way that we understand and interpret that data is through usually an API integration to pull that into our forecasting module, so that we can then begin to predict in the future what's needed. So a really good example of, I guess, bookings is in the case of events, but also in the case of hotels or any kind of accommodation brand, is we can bring that data in real time. And we can bring that in 15-minute increments, in hour increments into the platform. And that will then be able to provide updates to your labor model. So that can create real-time updates to say if your bookings have increased or spiked in a day for 2 days from now, it can increase your number of required bookings. The benefit of agentic AI on top of that is how do we then surface that to the manager to notify them that something needs to occur? Maybe you need someone additionally at the door to help welcome delegates to come into the event. That's where agentic AI can actually alert managers. So taking the need off the manager to have to go in, find the information, and then make a decision off that information, but rather alert to say, hey, we see that we've actually had a spike on Tuesday in number of bookings. We recommend one additional employee for this role. From there, the manager, again, human in the loop, can either acknowledge that, create that shift off the back of it, or choose not to. And that's where AI can really help to, I guess, provide that agility, which will naturally occur across any type of hospitality operation, whether it's a restaurant, whether it's a bar, whether it's an event, by providing real-time insights based on the data that's being fed. But the key thing is being able to get that data in. Otherwise, we're operating in a silo without the core metric or the core demand that's driving your operation.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you. And then another question around security wrap. I mean, I guess it's legality around it or compliance, ensuring compliance. What's your view on ensuring everything works correctly in terms of compliance, basically, and using the data properly? Obviously, you've got that set up.
Yeah, this is James's question, yeah?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, good question, James. And I think this is a good piece of due diligence that I'd recommend any operator, whether big or small, to think about. There's obviously a lot of platforms out there which are either standalone large language models, the ones we know, such as ChatGPT, Claude, etc. Would be very cautious about what kind of, I guess, sensitive information you'd put into that without the right subscription or criteria, because that information will be used to train their models. When you're looking at specialist solutions in markets, so for example, Deputy with our agentic AI solutions, that AI is trained on nothing but the data that's within your instance. So we're able to create a single tenant, which is disassociated from any other customers or with any kind of third party data that might influence it as well. So I'd always encourage you, whenever looking at a solution and their corresponding AI capabilities, understand what is the separation of your data from other customers or third party data to ensure that it is operating within the confines of the information that is related to your organization.
So, okay, and a couple more of the questions that came in earlier. One around where there's uptick. I think that we can agree there probably is an uptick in organisations looking for data-driven roles. But the second one was, and perhaps the one for you, Matt. Do you feel this takes away the need for knowledge and creativity amongst teams? The question was, do you not feel like AI takes away the need for true knowledge and authentic creativity from our industry?
Crikey. So it's quite a broad question in terms of what it looks like, and I think that you have, if you look at it within certain creative industries, there's definitely a threat that happens to the genuine creators around that, and protecting that is a really important component. I think there are, and therefore with any change that there are threats. I think that an important component is also the ability for critical thinking. And are we simply taking for granted what's presented in front of us? And as we seek for sort of absolute definites and answers and sort of confirmation bias, I think there is a part within it that is stopping people from challenging whether what is coming back is actually realistic. So I think there's lots of threats that are presented from this and create, around creativity, around critical thought. And I think, but And I also think there is some concern around personalization in terms of what it looks like, because it can become it's not random anymore. So those acts of kindness that are genuinely human, that come from a very intuitive and a moment of connection, if we just start to automate some of those ideas within the customer journey, it's a trick. And we lose authenticity within that space. So 100% poorly deployed technology, or not more deeply understanding what it's enabling within your business, can become a risk in terms of what's in place. And that's not you, but that at the same point is not universal. So well deployed technology that is done to complement and the and thinking within that space can actually liberate people to be much more creative within that part. You're taking them away from having to do the process that they find is dull and takes them out of flow, and creates time and space for where they can be much more within their own space and their own understanding of what they want to do, or in the customer service perspective, actually in a position where they can more connect much more deeply. So the danger is to make this conversation binary, and the world is increasingly trying to do this. If we name the complexity of what is happening and then we act in line with the levels of complexity that are in place, I believe that we can create the right outcomes, and actually it can be genuinely win-win.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's support, isn't it, rather than taking over thought or creativity in any way. Harry, anything to add to that?
No, I think Matt's actually hit the nail on the head there. I'd agree. I think he's exactly right. I think creativity is at the core of what makes hospitality hospitality, which is why, you know, AI and the potential of AI is all about supporting what people already do within their roles and taking that away so they can actually probably spend more time focusing on the creative elements of the role.
Sure. And we've only just got a limited time left. So, Harry, what might be next for AI? What are you guys looking at? Let's do a bit of future gazing. What do you see in 2 years' time, even?
Good question. I think in relation to what deputy does, I mean, it's always hard to predict the future, right? I think if you
Totally. I know, I understand that.
if you were to look back 2 years from now, I think the speed at which AI is advancing is incredible. But I guess thinking about it from the lens of what we do here at Deputy and from a workforce perspective, I think it's going to be very interesting to see what AI can do beyond just the workforce planning piece and ensuring you have the right people in the right place based on that data, but actually how can AI be used to provide more support in the human element, so from the HR functions across all different components. And I think that's where AI is going to be going, and really looking at how can we build in to more of those functions, those back office functions beyond just scheduling, to provide insights, provide real-time understanding about what's going on, and then provide more informed decisions on what to do. So I think it's hard to predict, but my gut says that it's going to be more around actual agents built into more organizations beyond just kind of like a one-time project. Here's what we can do. Here's the data. Make a decision. But actually building it into the workflows across all the different functions and departments within an organization.
Yeah, indeed. And Matt, same to you. What are you looking at in, let's say, the next 12 months? Is there anything coming down the line that you're keen? You've mentioned bookings and front desk. Is there any other areas you're keen to support?
Yeah, so I think where we've got to, and sort of flattering to hear thinking that Mollie's is relatively far forward in this area, and we want to be progressive, and there's lots wrong in our business. There's lots of hygiene stuff that we've got to sort out. And if you just layer agentic solutions on top of poorly constructed data, you're just getting to a bigger mess faster. And so we've deployed it in areas we think we can get those wins. And as we do it more, we start to realize there are components where we've got to get our data really well structured so we can leverage the opportunity that's in place. And that's both in terms of business intelligence, so we've got sort of single source of truth, but also in then agents being able to operate effectively within that space. So whilst we continue to experiment and move forward and realize new opportunity, there's also a huge amount of what we're doing and making sure that the foundations are actually fixed to give us the best opportunity of moving forward. So in one ways, I think that we're quite far forward, and in other ways, we've got to do a lot of work retrospective, on the foundations to give us a better opportunity to move forward. So it's a bit of the new and a bit of fixing the old.
Yeah, fab. Okay, well, we'll have to leave it there. But thank you ever so much, Matt Bell and Harry Wales. Really appreciate your input, and it's a fascinating conversation. Thanks, and thank you all for attending this webinar. I hope you've learned some tips, or at least a bit of insight to take back to your business. And yeah, thanks again to Matt and Harry, and of course to Deputy for making the webinar possible. So just leaves me to wish you all a wonderful day, and I'll see you at the Cater event very soon. Goodbye.